agradecemos a todos ustedes por haberse registrado en este seminario internacional respecto a innovación y nuevos desafíos referidos a la vigilancia, la prevención principalmente y el control de esta importante enfermedad que afecta globalmente a la industria del salmón, como lo es la caligidosis. Tenemos un interesante programa que compartir con ustedes el día de hoy. Vamos a partir con las palabras de inicio de este importante seminario por parte de nuestra directora nacional, Alicia Gallardo. Luego de ello van a venir las ponencias del productor Mowi con su representación noruega, ¿ya? Donde veremos principalmente el uso de agua dulce, ¿ya? Como herramienta de control de esta parasitosis. Mowi Noruega, luego Mowi Chile. A continuación presentará el productor Cermaq con la visión de tratamientos mecánicos con la experiencia generada en Noruega y los avances que han tenido a la fecha respecto a la aplicación de estos tratamientos en Chile. Luego de ello haremos un receso de 10 minutos ya, y a continuación seguiremos con la presentación de Hans Kosman, que presentará su innovador proyecto Salmoclinic. Luego de ello, SMIR, con Ricardo Moraleda, nos comentará respecto a la situación de hidrolyzer, cómo se viene esto como una opción para los productores en Chile. Y la última presentación de este seminario la dará Brighton Chang, ¿ya? Quien nos mostrará el innovador sistema de conteo automático de Calibus que recientemente la autoridad noruega permitió que reemplazara el sistema de conteo manual que se hacía, ¿ya? Esas son las charlas. Las ponencias del hemisferio norte van a ser en inglés, solo se van a traducir las preguntas, ya para que todos podamos entender cuál fue la respuesta. Les solicitamos que dejen sus preguntas por el chat, dado que al final de cada presentación haremos las preguntas a los panelistas, ¿ya? Y al final del seminario haremos un cierre por parte de la subdirectora de Acuicultura, Marcela Lara. Estas presentaciones van a ser filmadas, ¿ya? Y posteriormente serán compartidas en la página web del Pesca. Nosotros le haremos llegar el link donde podrán contar con ellas. Así que sin más, nuevamente, muchas gracias a los más de 200 participantes que tenemos en estos momentos del seminario por su preferencia, y a continuación dará las palabras de inicio Alicia Gallardo, directora nacional del Servicio Nacional de Pesca y Acuicultura.
Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Bueno, es un agrado para mí como directora de esta institución poder dar las palabras de bienvenida a este importante seminario, agradecer a las autoridades que nos acompañan, de la Subsecretaría de Pesca y de la DIRIMAR, bueno, y en especial al equipo de Marcela, la Subdirección de Acuicultura del Pesca, y a los invitados que tan gustosamente están hoy día con las diferencias de horario. El Calibus o el Sea Lice nos convoca desde hace mucho tiempo. Yo cuando conocí a Gordon ahí, I knew Gordon 10 years ago, lo conocí 10 años atrás, donde partió el primer, yo personalmente asistí al primer seminario Sea Lice internacional. De ahí los países líderes en producción nos juntamos todos los años, los 4 países, para discutir y analizar durante un día completo los avances en el Calibus. Y hoy día sigue siendo nuestra gran preocupación. Por eso consideramos pertinente juntarnos Chile-Noruega, los 2 principales países productores de salmón del mundo, para compartir nuestra experiencia. Y también estar a la vanguardia de la tendencia internacional, las recomendaciones de la Organización Mundial de Sanidad Animal, que son fundamentalmente tratamientos o el manejo del cáligus o el sea lice en forma preventiva, invertir mucho más en la prevención y a la hora de hacer tratamientos de bajo impacto ambiental, amigables con el medio ambiente. Es algo que nosotros, porque queremos que el salmón de Chile, el salmón de Noruega y el salmón en general, siga siendo una actividad sustentable y podamos alimentar a muchos ciudadanos y ciudadanas del mundo en el tiempo. Entonces la idea fuerza de este taller fundamentalmente es compartir experiencias innovadoras, compartir experiencias amigables con el medio ambiente, que disminuyen el impacto ambiental, y también experiencias que apoyan el bienestar animal. No olvidemos que estamos tratando animales y que no podemos olvidar y dejar de lado los principios básicos de bienestar animal que nosotros debemos tener en consideración al hacer un tratamiento de cualquier tipo. Por lo tanto, a mi juicio, tiene los tres elementos que son recomendaciones internacionales. También agradecer que tenemos una audiencia bastante que cubre toda la cadena de valor. Hay algunos representantes de empresas, hay veterinarios, hay laboratorios farmacéuticos, hay laboratorios de nuestra red, hay proveedores de servicios, hay también prestadores de servicios de transporte. Por lo tanto, creo que hemos abarcado la cadena completa de valor que nos interesa que estemos todos conversando en lo técnico. Quiero también adelantarles que nosotros hemos estado conversando con los grupos técnicos una modificación del programa de vigilancia y control de cáligus que tiene justamente lo que yo les estoy mencionando, un incentivo al tratamiento no farmacológico, un cuidado mayor del medio ambiente, un incentivo a la innovación y también considerar la normativa de bienestar animal. Por lo tanto, en el tiempo seguiremos difundiendo este programa y conversando con todos los actores para, una vez tener claridad de los aspectos técnicos, empezar a hablar de la implementación, que es un tema más bien logístico y que tenemos que ir, obviamente, conversando con todos los actores. Bueno, muchas gracias, thank you very much, de todos los expositores, darles las gracias por estar acá y que tengamos un excelente seminario. Muchas gracias, Carlos, y te devuelvo el micrófono. Gracias.
Gracias, directora. Bueno, a continuación vamos a iniciar nuestro webinar. Con la primera presentación va a ser expuesta por Gordon Ritchie. Él es licenciado en Ciencias de la Universidad de St. Andrews, PhD en la Universidad de Aberdeen, trabajó como investigador en salud de peces y luego como gerente técnico en Nutreco. Desde 2007 al 2012 fue vicepresidente de salud en Marine Harvest, actual Mowi, y desde esa fecha hasta ahora ha ocupado el cargo de gerente de salud y bienestar de peces en esta compañía, ¿ya? Además de ser responsable de salud, supervisa las actividades de investigación del departamento técnico en la área de investigación y desarrollo en Mowi Global. A continuación, entonces, dejo con ustedes al señor Gordon Ritchie.
Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I would like to extend our appreciation to all our foreign speakers for taking the time to share your experiences and all your knowledge on this matter about the control of the sea lice problem. So without further introduction, I would like to give the pass to Mr. Gordon Ritchie and Mrs. Benedicte Simonsen from Mowi Norway, so we can enjoy the presentation about the dynamic use of the preventive tools against the sea lice in Mowi Norway. Please.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Benedicta, if you can upload the presentation and I'll just say a few introductory words. Thank you for the invitation, Alicia, Carlos, and Gonzalo. A great opportunity for us, and we very much appreciate to tell you some more about the dynamic use of preventive tools against sea lice in Mowi Norway. Just to say as a start, this is a conclusion of many years of work, probably about 10 years of work, studying the use of skirts, the use of deep lights, the use of deep feeding systems, etc. And the more recent work that we have been doing is combining and integrating all the preventive tools into what we call the dynamic use concept. So this concept is now being rolled out on 15 to 18 sites in Mowi Norway as we speak. And we'll be tracking the performance of the system as we go along. So I'll pass you over to Benedicta, who will give the presentation. Benedicta is a project manager in Mowi Group, working in the seawater technology area. And she is the project manager of the dynamic use of preventive tools. Thanks, Benedicta.
Thank you, Gordon, and everyone for that great introduction, and thanks a lot for your time and to be able to open this show. That's a great honor. So thank you for that. So as Gordon said, I will be talking about dynamic use of preventive tools against lice in Norway, and hopefully you will get some key points and elements that you can bring with you back to the Chilean production. So let's start with the why do we need and why do we have to have these preventive tools? So we also need tools for lice treatments, both medicinal and mechanical still. But we know, however, that treatments, they come with great challenges, including handling and stress of our fish, feed withdrawal and growth impacts. There's a risk of development of resistance, and lice treatments for sure drives production cost. So what we aim to do with preventive tools is to transition from a treatment and firefighting strategy approach into a strategy of proactive prevention, where we reduce infection by separating the lice from the salmon and thus reduce the number of treatments required through a production cycle. So let's start with skirts. Gordon already mentioned we have years of experiences with skirts, and what we know through field work and trials, we know that skirts reduce lice pressure. These graphs are a selection of cages from Norway with lice numbers over time, and in common in all of them is that lice numbers are lowest in cages with skirts on. We've seen this result in Norway, and I know that there has always been similar results in Chile. So we know with many years experience that skirts reduce lice pressure. We also know that there is no negative impacts on welfare as long as we pay attention to the water quality inside the skirts. We have to pay attention because there are a few risks related to gill issues. But all in all, skirts as a lice preventative tool that works. Taking it one step further with deep lights and or deep feeding. We also know through trials and field work that we can alter fish behavior and location in the pen with deep feeding and deeper placement of the lights. Several trials have also shown that there's no negative impacts on welfare or fish health using deep lights or deep feeding. And we've seen, observation have shown us that the use of these tools needs to be tailored to seasonal changes and influences. Now, let's put everything together, all the tools together, because we've seen even better results when all these tools are used combined. That means using skirts and also putting in systems for aeration to mitigate risks of poor water quality, together with deep feeding and deep lights. So the graph on top here, that's lice numbers, lice infection over time in 4 different groups, where the cages are equipped with different tools. So the first group here, group A, there we have only cleaner fish in the cages. And in group B, the yellow line, there we have cleaner fish and functional feed in these cages. Then we go to group C, where we really start to see an effect on lice infection. So group C have still the cleaner fish, the functional feed, but here we've also added deep feeding and deep lights. Finally, going to the last graph, the line, the green line, group D, which have the significant most, the lowest lice numbers of all groups. There we had the whole package in. We had cleaner fish, functional feed, deep feeding, deep lights, and skirts with aeration. This really shows that the whole package, that has a clear effect on infection levels. The most pronounced effect we see when we have all tools combined, like we have in group D in the top graph. We note that we see constant reduced infection pressure, and also note that this effect is more predominant in certain periods. Yet again, we've seen no negative impacts on fish welfare, and like the last or the bottom graph shows here, we see that growth improvements also in certain seasons. So let's take it one step further and use all the knowledge that we have so far with all the trials we've had, and the fact that we know that the tool works better in some periods. Let's try and use the tools dynamically and according to the environmental conditions. We did this over a whole production cycle, and our results were clear. We saw clear and consistent effect on lice levels. We saved 2 treatments on average between the two groups, the treatment group and the control group. We did see a lower mortality in the test group, and yet again we saw no negative impacts on fish welfare. A success story, really, if you ask me. So why is this dynamic approach working so well? To answer that, let's take a few steps back and think about what we know about fish behavior and sea behavior in different environmental conditions. So we know there's a few main drivers on fish behavior. We have temperature. Fish will swim at the depth where the temperature is closest to optimal. And we also have feed. Fish will locate to where the feed is delivered, but it will return to the optimal temperature after feeding. And if the water column has a homogeneous temperature, the swimming depth can be altered to feeding depth. This we know about fish behavior. let's go to the main drivers on sea lice behavior. Light. So sea lice or lice larvae, they are phototactic, so they stay at the surface and try to stay closer to the light normally. But we also know about salinity. Lice, they are sensitive to low salinities, so they avoid brackish or fresh water at the surface, and they do that by descending deeper below the freshwater or brackish water layer, below what we call a halocline. Okay, so we know quite a few things about fish behavior and lice behavior in different environmental conditions. And we also know a few things about how the environment changes over time. We know the temperature is very dependent on season. Typically, it's very cold in the surface in winter, for example, and very warm in the surface during summer. Same thing we know about brackish water in the surface. At least in Norway, that's very dependent on season and site locations, and I guess the same thing would apply for Chile. But often we see after weeks of rain or even snow melting or runoff in the surroundings, we see brackish water. So what we really aim to do is to use all of our tools according to the prevailing environmental conditions. And the aim is to separate the fish and the parasite. And to do that, the surveillance of the environment is essential. We have to know if and when a regime and setup should be changed. And here we have created in Norway a film that I will try and share with you guys. Let's see if I can share another window. And this is an explanatory film about changes in different setups. So let's see. If this is playing. Okay, let's go.
The tiny sea lice is salmon farming's biggest challenge. With current treatment methods under continuous scrutiny and representing a significant stress on our fish, successful management of sea lice is a top priority to solve. Today, we have several non-medicinal treatment options, but best is always to avoid delousing through prevention. Good prevention strategies will reduce treatment frequency, mortality, and lost feeding time, but also improve fish welfare.
Sea lice is our biggest challenge. Sea lice control, sea lice treatment in particular, can compromise fish welfare. It drives production costs, and it can also limit the growth of our industry. This is why we need to do everything we can to reduce production pressure on our sites. We have preventive tools, and they will work best when we're able to adapt them to the specific site and environmental conditions.
Salmon and sea lice have different preferences regarding their environment in sea. The behavior of both is influenced by conditions such as light, salinity, oxygen, temperature, and feeding strategies. Salmon behavior is mainly influenced by sea temperature, its level of hunger, oxygen, and light conditions, in that order. Salmon will prefer the more optimal temperature, but will move to other depths if feed is delivered there. They respond to surrounding light conditions, which means underwater lights can influence behavior when it's not daylight. Sea lice behavior is mainly influenced by salinity and light levels, but temperature and hydrodynamic conditions may also impact their whereabouts. Sea lice will normally prefer upper water layers, but will descend deeper if salinity decreases at the surface. As site conditions vary with geography, season, and time of day, static measures are not an optimal strategy. We must change the preventative tools we use according to the prevailing environmental conditions.
We have multiple tools to reduce lice pressure if they are used correctly. Submerged lights, submerged feeding, and lice skirts. However, knowledge tells us that the tools must be adapted to the conditions at the site. This means that some tools will not necessarily work optimal all year round, but needs to be adjusted to the conditions change. It will require somewhat more efforts, but lice control and reducing treatment should have a high priority.
During periods of homogeneous temperatures throughout the water column, lice are mainly found in the top 5 to 6 meters. Here, lice skirts will minimize infestation rate, and deeper skirts give better protection. Aeration secures good oxygen levels inside the skirt. And deep feeding and deep lights will lure the majority of the fish deep, below the lice belt. However, in homogeneous temperature conditions with brackish water at the surface, lice descend to higher salinity. Here, we want to keep salmon away from the area of highest infestation pressure, which is now deeper in the cage. Surface feeding and surface lights lure salmon to shallower depths, avoiding the lice, and discourage frequent passing of the hallow climb. The brackish water in itself also has a curative effect on lice. We often find the optimal temperature conditions for salmon in surface waters. If salinity also remains high, the lice are found mainly at shallow depths. And lice skirts protect salmon from the parasite. Surface feeding will now facilitate higher growth rates, while deep lights lure fish deeper during nighttime. Aeration secures good oxygen levels inside the skirt. With optimal temperatures at the surface and presence of a brackish water layer, infected lice will again descend deeper. Now, we want to take advantage of the brackish water and at the same time keep salmon and lice apart. Lights and feeding at the surface lure the salmon into the brackish water and prevent frequent crossing of the hallow climb. When surface temperatures are either too warm or cold, with preferred temperatures for the salmon found deeper, deep feeding and deep lights are used to keep the salmon deep. Lice skirts should be used to shield fish swimming closer to the surface, while aeration maintains good oxygen levels and acceptable water quality. Appearance of a brackish water layer will again make lice descend to greater depths. In such conditions, it's important to feed deep enough, below the depth where lice concentration is highest, to avoid frequent crossing of the hallow climb. We want salmon to ascend during nighttime to self-treat in the brackish water, and will achieve this by moving lights shallower in the cage.
There are different scenarios and many potential conditions we'll need to consider. The use of available tools needs to be adapted and dynamic for them to work optimally. It is therefore critical that we stay informed about the environmental conditions at our farm to always be able to use the best tool at any given time throughout the production.
Effective lice control is required to achieve good production results. Our goal is to prolong the time before first delousing and minimize treatment and handling. Thus, we must keep a close eye on the prevailing environmental conditions and prioritize and adapt the tools we use as these conditions change. Find more information about the recommended tools and how to use them in one Mowi.
Okay, that was our film. I hope you found it informative and useful. I very much appreciate it. So let's just pick up where we left and what the film really explained, and our aim about separating fish and parasite through adjustments of the correct tools according to prevailing environmental conditions. So let's just take a recap of what the film told us about different types of equipment to use. The skirts, they should be on when there's no brackish layer. This creates a physical barrier between lice and salmon in the surface. However, they should be off or lifted when there's a brackish layer present. This gives the fish access to the brackish layer in the surface, and it helps for a natural delousing effect. The aeration, similar as with the skirts, they should be on when the skirts are on, so when there's no brackish layer. They secure and maintain a good oxygen level and good water quality inside the skirts. They should be turned off when the skirts are off, when there's a brackish layer present. This way we avoid disturbing the brackish layer at the top, and the fish can still use it for natural self-delousing. For feeding, should be done in the surface when the temperature is optimal in the surface. This secures the production, and it avoids the fish frequently crossing over the halocline. The feed should be given deep when the optimal temperature is deep, or if the temperature profile is homogeneous. This again secures good production and avoid frequent crossing over the halocline that might be present. The lights, they should be placed in the surface when there's a brackish layer present. This will then lure the fish up in the brackish layer at night time, and the fish can self-treat up there. They should be placed deep when there's no brackish layer. Then we will lure the fish deep during nighttime and away from where the lice level, the lice concentrations are highest in the surface. So what we end up with is really six different scenarios or 6 different environmental conditions that all requires a different set of tools to work optimally. So here we have all 6 of them and listed all tools to use for each different scenario, and it's important to change tools accordingly when the environment change, to always have the optimal tools in place and avoid them not working, or even worse, having the opposite effect. So getting to this last summary slide of what we have learned, and as Gordon said, now are trying to implement in Mowi Norway about the dynamic use of preventative tools against sea lice. We know that prevention is better than frequent treatments. It's better for fish health, welfare, and for performance. And for behavior, we know that behavior of fish and lice is dependent on environmental conditions. And through monitoring, we can change the preventative tools according to prevailing environmental conditions and use the tools optimally. And that way, we can, in the end, minimize amount of treatments required. That was all I had. Thanks a lot for the time, and thank you a lot for this very good seminar or webinar. I'm happy to I don't know if there's time still for a few questions. Gordon and I will both be available for questions. Gordon is he's also an expert in this, so he knows a lot too.
Okay, thank you very much, Benedicte and Gordon, for your excellent presentation. with the video also a super clear tool to show all the different new strategies that you're putting together there in Norway. So thank you very much. Les acabo de agradecer una excelente presentación, muy completa, un video muy ilustrativo de la implementación de todas estas herramientas.